welcome back to another live stream. Welcome to my channel. If you're here joining us live, comment in the chat box and say hi. If you're new here, I'm Vanessa, and I'm a YA fantasy, paranormal, and horror writer and book publisher. So on this channel, I talk about books, writing, and all things related to storytelling. And today's live stream is part of my monthly Writing Diversely series. This is a series I created to help writers learn how to write diverse characters. So in today's live stream, I'm chatting with Alana Reeves, author of Talks Too Much, which I loved, and I did a book review of that a couple months back. So it's linked in the description if anyone wants to check out that review. And today we're going to be talking about Alana's experiences with ADHD and being diagnosed later on as an adult. So Alana, do you want to say hi and give a brief introduction of yourself?
Yes, thanks, Vanessa. Hello, everybody. So I'm Alana. I am 40 and I was diagnosed when I was 39 with ADHD after previously having absolutely no idea whatsoever that I had ADHD. It wasn't even on my radar. In true ADHD fashion, I impulsively wrote a book about my experience, and that was within the year of being diagnosed. It was my way of sort of working through that discovery and what that meant for me. It's been a really cathartic experience.
Cool. Awesome. So before we get started, one quick disclaimer that I always start with during these interviews. I want to remind everyone watching that, of course, no group is a monolith. So Alana is here graciously sharing with us her experience as someone who is neurodivergent and has ADHD. And hopefully this will help other writers out there as well. But keep in mind, her experiences do not represent everyone who is neurodivergent or has ADHD. So always make sure you do your research well and get sensitivity readers for your stories. So with that said, let's dive into some of the questions. So the first question I have here is ADHD obviously looks different for everyone, but especially women, since our symptoms tend to be more internal than external. So what has your experience with it been like?
Yeah, definitely. So I obviously, like a lot of people, had this image of ADHD being, a young boy who can't sit still in the classroom, who's jumping around and doesn't pay attention. Ironically, my son was that child. So the way that he presented, I initially couldn't relate to. But then when I started reading up about ADHD, I was thinking, I relate to that a lot with what I was reading. And over time, I've discovered that things like hyperactivity, for example, I experience hyperactivity internally. So for me, it feels like what I imagine anxiety feels like, where my body was just always tense. I always felt like I was like the fight or flight mode. I was always in fight or flight mode. And it wasn't until I was medicated that I realized that it was actually ADHD. That was life-changing to realize that. So I was always tense. That was the biggest thing for me. I held my body very tensely. I would grind my teeth at night. I would wake up frowning. I'd have dreams about organizing things and not being able to get to places on time. And I just thought I was a very stressed out person. And it wasn't until I was diagnosed I realized there was actually a name for it.
Yeah. you mentioned kind of reminds me of, for myself, I feel like even within the medical or mental health professions, ADHD is really misunderstood, especially in women. Because I remember my psychiatrist at one point asking me about impulsivity. And to me, I'm like, yeah, I mean, I haven't been more impulsive than my usual, I guess. And he was like, well, what's impulsive? What do you mean by that? I'm like, I tend to jump around to different projects and like have a hard time finishing things due and like want to go to something else or switching career moves or whatever. And he was like, that's not what I was thinking when I said impulsive. I guess he was thinking more like, you know, shopping impulsively and like engaging in high risky behaviors. And I'm like, okay, but still.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I
And
think,
that's right. It looks so different for every person, doesn't it? You know, and I think a lot of the time we are teaching some professionals, you know, extra things to look out for that are not in the books and they're not in the diagnostic criteria, but they fit the bill as well. They look different to what we've always thought they looked like.
yeah, they do.
Yeah.
I see one person joined us, neurodivergent. Hi, glad you could make it and you're here. Let's see. My next question was just what led you to seek a diagnosis?
Yeah, so my son was diagnosed with ADHD, and like I said, I was reading up about it and I was relating to it, but I kind of just stuck my head very firmly in the sand and thought, I don't want to think about that right now. I wanted to get him sorted. And then about 12 months after he was diagnosed, I was just getting, I don't want to say worse, but I was struggling more and more. And it was getting to the point where I was like, this can't be right. Like, this cannot be how I'm supposed to live my life. And then I started researching ADHD in women, and I have never related to something more. And it was different to, you know, what I had experienced with him. So it was this shift in thinking that it had to look a certain way. And it felt like such a relief to see all these symptoms and read stories from other women and be like, oh, that's why. And I just couldn't live the way that I was living anymore. So that's what pushed me to go for a diagnosis. And I was very, very privileged and very lucky to be able to do that. There are so many people who can't. And that's part of the reason why I share my journey, because even if people can't get diagnosed themselves, they can learn about their brain and they can, you know, come up with ways to help themselves that they might never have otherwise realized. So I think if I'm presenting my ADHD the way I experience it, then the possibility of helping other people, you know, can happen. And yeah, it's good to share.
Yeah, yeah, it is. I think um, the more people realize how different it can look for people, especially women, the more it'll be easier to catch earlier on and get
Yeah,
support for.
exactly.
So in your book, you talked about the process of getting a diagnosis, and you had to do some testing and gather documents and get stuff from your family members and everything. So can you talk a little bit about what that process was like.
Yeah, I joke that this is the irony of trying to get tested for ADHD. It's hard enough to get yourself organised to do anything, let alone trying to follow up on these tests that you have to do. That was an extra level of fun as an undiagnosed, unmedicated ADHD person. So I specifically sought out a psychiatrist who specialised in adult ADHD. I had read that lots of people have trouble with psychiatrists who don't actually understand how ADHD presents in adults, let alone women. And I was really conscious of avoiding that. Prior to the appointment, I had a list of 1,000 things that made me realize that I had ADHD. So I approached my GP first, and she was really supportive and referred me to a psychiatrist. Well, I'd already found the psychiatrist. She just gave me the referral. And then on my first appointment with him, we just chatted a little bit. I told him a few of the things that led me to suspect that I had ADHD. And then he did some diagnostic testing. So I ran through some questions. I had to, excuse me, I had to answer some questions. And then at the end of that appointment, he basically said, look, I think you have ADHD, but we need to do some further testing. So I'm so sorry. It's early in the morning here in my throat. My throat keeps needing to clear. So I had to take away some questionnaires for my parents and my husband to fill out. I had to get some blood tests done and have an ECG. So basically that just tests your heart for any heart abnormalities, heart rate abnormalities. And I had to also have a drug test as well. I'm not sure if they do that elsewhere, but basically you're getting tested to make sure you're not already on some sort of substance, I think that's why they do it. I got my parents and my husband to fill out the form. Luckily, my parents have kept my school reports. So that's where the name Talks Too Much comes from, actually. One of my, not just one, actually, lots of my school reports says distracts others, talks too much, doesn't pay attention to details, could do better. So I collated all of that stuff. And then had my second appointment where I brought all those bits and pieces back to my psychiatrist, and I was then given a test, which this is actually quite interesting that other people might benefit from knowing. So I had to do a test where you sit in front of the computer and you have to, it brings up coloured circles, red circles, blue circles, red squares, blue squares, and it puts them up on the screen. And if there's a repeat of one, so say 2 red circles, you have to press the space bar. It's supposed to test your inattention. But the problem is I work in front of a computer all day. So I'm used to sitting in front of a computer and concentrating. So you're supposed to fail the test. I passed the test. But he's brilliant, my psych. He knows that. He knows I work in front of a computer. He knows that, I've had to sit and concentrate in front of a computer out of pure necessity because that was my job. So he just counts that as part of the diagnostic criteria. It's not a make or break, which is so good because there's lots of clinicians who would say that somebody doesn't have ADHD because of that and not take everything into consideration. So I was very grateful that he had a much more reasonable view of that. And then I started medication after the second appointment.
Awesome. Yeah, not a lot of people would take those things into consideration. It's something I actually was talking to my therapist about one time. I was like, I feel like the diagnostic criteria is not very inclusive to different cultures, different type of people, because just some of the symptoms, it's not going to be easily seen, depending on the person and their background, right?
And also things like, there was questions like, struggles to stay sitting during a meeting. And it's like, well, we're conditioned to behave ourselves. So I'm not going to stand up in a meeting because then everyone's going to look at me. But that doesn't mean I don't have ADHD. I'm just like, on the inside, I'm like, like I want to move, but I won't.
Exactly.
But that doesn't mean I don't have ADHD.
Yeah. Exactly. That's when like the questions, the criteria, and like they need to just start over from scratch.
Or you need psychiatrists like mine who make it their business to inform themselves properly, and not just keep the knowledge that they had from the last 5 years, but continually update themselves from lived experience. They need to actually be asking people who are living with this what it feels like for them.
Yeah. So my school notes was just a long list of these ways to say talented but lazy.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Well, also talented but lazy, but you're not lazy. That thing is boring to you, so you don't want to do it. But people view that as you being lazy.
Yeah. Or when the thing you do want to do, the thing you hyper focus on seems unproductive.
Yes.
I remember as a kid, like my parents, my dad especially, would ask me, how do you sit in front of the TV like all day? Like from the time you get up to the time you go to bed, you're just in front of the TV watching TV. And I didn't realize it till I got diagnosed. I'm like, oh, that was probably hyper focus. I was into whatever was on.
Yeah. It is. It's still alive. It's a glass water bottle, and there's an ongoing saga with that. But yes, this one is still alive.
So, where was I? My next question was, do you use any medications or therapies to treat your ADHD? And if so, what does that look like?
I do, yes. Oh my God, medication has just changed my life. It's just been the best thing that ever happened to me. So I am on Vyvanse, which is lisdexamphetamine, which is a long-acting dexamphetamine. That works well for me because I don't know how people remember to take medication multiple times a day. I just would really struggle with that. And so my son is also on the same medication. So that's been really good. It's actually been really good to be on the same medication because I can totally see when he needs his medication to go up. Actually, at one point it was a little bit too high, and I could just tell straight away because I know how that feels. So, but yeah, medication. It's just I'm still the same person, which is something that I was really worried about. But sorry, this is one of my many alarms. Ironically, that is my medication alarm. That's perfect timing. It's medication has allowed my brain to slow down enough to feel good about myself. That's actually the biggest thing for me.
Yeah. Well, kind of going along with that, because I know in the book you talked about and said how you thought that the medication would motivate you to work on certain things, which I did too. But that's not what it did. It just cleared your mind and helped you to focus, but that doesn't always mean it's going to be the right thing to focus on. So in addition to the medication helping you focus, have you found any ways to motivate yourself to work on stuff that you don't want to work on and get it done?
Yeah, that was a massive one for me. And I actually think it's a really important conversation that we're not having enough about the goal of medication. So like many people, I genuinely thought the goal of medication was to become more neurotypical. So I would be tidier, I would be more organized, I would get places on time. So they're all neurotypical ideals of what a successful, great person looks like. But I'm not neurotypical. So that was a huge revelation for me when I wasn't achieving those things. I wasn't tidier or on time or whatever, but I didn't care because I felt good for the first time. Like, you, until you have a point of reference for how you can feel, you actually don't know, and you can probably relate to this, you don't know how bad you feel until you feel a little bit better. And then you're like, wow, I felt really bad and I didn't know how bad I felt. So I came to learn that feeling better was the point. Being better at neurotypical things was not the point. And instead of beating myself up for not being able to reach these neurotypical ideals, I started embracing my neurodiversity and, you know, the joy that came from being able to just allow myself to be how I needed to be, not how society wanted me to be. That was the biggest and best thing for me. So in terms of motivating myself to get tasks that I don't want to work on, that is an ongoing battle. I can't say I've got that many tips. I like to reward myself with things. So doing things in small chunks helps. So I'll just say to myself, just do 10 minutes. Like, do 10 minutes and then you can have 5 minutes to do whatever you want. Or I'll give myself the 5 minutes to do what I want before, and then I'll quickly do the 10 minutes after. So I'm trying to design a life where I don't have to do as many things that I don't want to do that I did before, if that makes sense. I'm just about to start a new job and it's in the neurodivergence area. So I'm going to be working in something I'm really passionate about and doing work that is the stuff that I like. So I was working in a job where I just didn't enjoy it. I was bored. I was so bored. I couldn't make myself do it. So now this new job, because it's in an area that I love, I'm catering to my neurodivergence by working in something that I'm passionate about. So rather than come up with like tips and tricks to motivate myself, I'm trying to curate a life where I'm doing things that I love. And I know not everybody can do that. I'm very, very, very aware of that. But hopefully some people can find things, just little things in their day that work for them, just like giving themselves permission to have a messy house. It doesn't matter. Like, who even told us we have to have a tidy house? Where did that even come from? You know, it's just little things like that. Just saying to yourself, those things don't matter. So yeah, I'm not the best person to give tips for that kind of thing, I don't think.
That's okay. I agree. I'm the same way. It's like I have to try to find ways to I think for me the thing is if I can trick my brain into just getting started,
Yeah.
then I can do it without no issues. Because once I start, I'm not gonna want to stop until I'm done, until I finished it. So it's just the getting started that's like, and that's why for me, I thought like, you know, getting on medication would help me jumpstart that. Okay, let's get started on this now. No, not really, but if I could find a way to trick myself to do it, I will.
Yeah. I did find at work, I learnt ways to get other people to help me. So I would ask my managers for deadlines. That was a big one because I work so much better. Like, if you say to me, just get that done whenever you feel like it. No, that is like torture for me. Like, give me a date and a time. I would do it an hour before, but I will do it.
Exactly. I remember you said that in the book, and when I read that part, I was thinking, oh my gosh, that's so true. Because in my previous job that I worked on, I had a project that I was assigned to work on, but I never had a due date. And then I just realized I never finished it. I never completed that
See,
project.
that's not your fault. They should have given you a deadline.
Yeah. Um, let's see. I started telling people off when they try to show the organization to stuff like those days. I should probably chill with that.
No, because I bet those organization tips are neurotypical ones. Like when they say, just just make a list, or just put it in a diary. It's like, yeah, I'll make a list and never look at the list again. Like, cool tip, thanks.
Yeah. And Holly's here. Hi, Holly.
Hi, Holly.
Glad you could join us. Yeah. The typical organization advice doesn't help. But you know what? I did find a YouTube channel called, I think it's Clutterbug, I think is her YouTube channel name. But she has ADHD as well, and she's a professional organizer. So she, one, has tips on how to organize for ADHD, neurodivergent brains. And I love how she has these like 4 different categories. And like you can see, okay, if you're this type of person, this organization style would work best for you, or this organization style would be best for you. So I really like her channel. If I remember after this interview, I will link that channel below. So, let's see. The list pet peeve. Happy to be here. I love the series. I usually look in the comments, so if I don't comment, I'm still here. No problem. Glad you're here. So, my next question that I had was, let's see. Oh, so my next question is, because you, in the bio you sent me, you mentioned that you are also autistic. And so you recently self-diagnosed yourself with autism, right? So I was wondering what led you to suspect an autistic diagnosis.
Yeah, so probably about 3 or so months ago, I'd been on medication for almost a year, and I've been on medication for about 9 months, and I started noticing that sensory issues that I had were far more noticeable and pronounced, and I just. There was this one particular moment. So I was in a Teams meeting. I was working from home, and I honestly, the chit chat and the small talk, and it was just going round and round in circles. And I was just thinking, this is such a waste of my time. And I felt so uncomfortable. My skin felt like, my body felt like it was going to burst out of my skin. And I just had to move. And the meeting finished, and I just like screamed because I was so frustrated. And I went into my son's room and I said to him, he's only 8. And I said to him, I'm just going to lay on the bed. Can you lay on top of me? I just need pressure on my body. And as I laid there, I thought, I've heard about people using pressure to like relieve tension. And I was like, I've heard about autistic people. I was like, hang on a minute. And I'd sort of had it in my peripheral for a while, but I thought, same as ADHD, I'd only been exposed to the male presentation of autism, and I wasn't quite ready to look at it then. I felt a bit overwhelmed by the idea of it, but then I very gradually started consuming information, particularly TikToks by women with lived experience. And wow, even more than ADHD, I felt like I was coming home. I all of a sudden I was around all of these people who were describing how my weird brain has worked my whole life, and I didn't know that other people felt like that. And so many things slotted into place. So a massive one is eye contact. So I have always been able to do eye contact, but I always think about the eye contact. So when I'm talking to someone, I'm thinking about our eye contact and how long will we do it, and do I look at them for this long, and they're looking at me for too long. And so I thought because I could do it, that I was like, oh, well, I'm not autistic then because I can. But I've since learned that women have taught themselves to give people eye contact. I had also forgotten about the fact that when I don't like somebody, I literally cannot look at them. It actually hurts. There's not a chance I could look at somebody that I don't like. And so when I realized that other women do the same thing, and actually learning how to give eye contact was a form of masking, I was like, oh, okay, so what else is there that I thought there's no way I could be autistic? And yeah, all these things just started adding up. And I'm a very, very firm believer in self-diagnosis, because there's so many people that can't get diagnosed. It's such a barrier for so many people. Why should they be less able to learn about their brain than somebody who can get diagnosed? Also, the diagnosis wait list is so long. I'm not going to wait 9 months to say I'm autistic just because someone's going to tell me. I know I am. So for me to like sort of skirt around it and go, oh, I don't know, should I say I am or not? I'm just going to say it because it's such a relief to me to be able to say it. And it makes so much sense that it seems like ridiculous that I didn't realize until now. Yeah. But typically with a lot of people, this is a similar story a lot of people have, where they get diagnosed with ADHD. They're then medicated for ADHD. And for me, I realized that my ADHD was actually compensating for my autism. So, and now that the ADHD is a little more under control, it can't do its job anymore and cover up or compensate for autism. So things that I could tolerate before because, I don't know, I just could, I can't now. So my sensitivities, my sensory triggers and stuff like that are a lot more apparent, and I'm not as able to mask as I was before because of my ADHD.
Yeah. Well, I think, and I think I've heard that from other women as well, just like, once treatment for one started, they started noticing that and it's so it's so crazy to me how like a lot of the symptoms also overlap with ADHD and autism. Because I remember at one point I was looking at autism and I was like, am I? I don't. And because there's such a big overlap, it's like I was always kind of wondering, okay, is this ADHD or is this autism? But I don't have problem with sensory issues, so maybe not. And I don't know.
I think as well, because there's such a lack of information. So, for example, another reason why I thought I couldn't be autistic is because I was like, well, I don't have meltdowns. We've been shown, images of boys or men when they have a meltdown, it's very loud and verbal, and they may be rocking their body back and forth and, you know, shaking their hands, stimming. But I do have meltdowns. My meltdowns are when I am suffering from sensory overload, and I particularly will get really angry at my kids. And so I will scream and shout and be quite rude. Or even when I just get in, I start getting really snappy with people, and really, I'm not tolerant of things. Those things are all meltdowns. So what I thought it had to look like, it doesn't have to look like that. It looks differently for everybody. In terms of the overlap between ADHD and autism, there's not enough research. I think the overlap is a lot bigger than we realize, because autism is so misunderstood, and so is ADHD in women as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of sort of big organizations borrow a lot of the traits of autism and label them as ADHD when they're not it's not necessarily correct. I was actually guilty of that in my book. There's quite a few things now when I read back, I think that is autistic. That's not ADHD. But I've left my book as it is because I know how many people it's helped. The information is still relevant, but I'm writing a follow-up book with my friend Annie, about the follow-on journey of people who find out they've got ADHD and then go on to realize they also are autistic, because and that's the reason I'm leaving my book as it is, because I feel like that's a really important part of the journey to take people on to realizing that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a fascinating subject.
I'm definitely interested in your next one when it comes out.
Yeah.
So I'm a fan of just doing stuff on the floor and getting my workout, jumping over. And
it's a perfectly valid workout.
Sensory issues are a big part of my struggle, complete with meltdowns that were
Yes.
this panic disorder. Now you
So
have
I can relate to the panic disorder. So in my book, I talk about a breakdown that I had where I was suffering from panic attacks all day long for weeks on end. Looking back now, that was actually autistic burnout, which is very, very common. So I follow this cycle where I will get a job, and because it's new and it's fresh and I'm learning all about it, this is pre-diagnosis. I'm interested in the job because I'm learning and it's new and it's fresh and I can cope, and I'm the new girl, so it's okay if I'm not good at some things. And then after about a year, it starts declining where there's too much pressure on me and I'm struggling and I'm not keeping up with things. And then I just quit. And then I find another job and I do the same thing again. And so the breakdown that I had was a culmination of all of that. And it was, in retrospect, autistic burnout, because I was working with a really narcissistic boss. A girl got fired and I was doing 2 jobs. And because I didn't recognize the point I was getting to, my body was just like, well, if you're not going to do something about it, I am. And it just completely shut down. And it wasn't until my most recent job that for the first time in my life, I recognized it's not the job, it's not the people I work with, it's me. And I was heading towards another autistic burnout, but for the first time I could recognize what it was. So my panic attacks are like little mini meltdowns. So yeah, it is thought provoking, and it's worth looking into, in my opinion.
Oh. Well, we kind of touched on this, but are there any other ways that you've masked with your ADHD?
So yeah, like in every possible way. I just pretended to everybody that I was okay. So if you had asked anybody that knows me if I have ADHD or if I'm autistic, they would have just laughed and said not a chance. Because like so many women, I I didn't know that wasn't how you were supposed to feel. So I just pretended that I was feeling okay. And the thing with neurodivergent people is when we get to the point where we ask for help, like we really need that help and we need it like right then. So I would, get to this point of breakdown or a burnout. But because I hadn't been including people in how I actually felt, it was like a shock to people around me. And I still even hid that, really. Like I would say I'm not feeling very well, but like I was having, panic attack on top of each other all day long, but I wasn't really telling anybody. So yeah, I masked severely, and I'm trying to learn how to unmask. And that's why I'm so vocal about my experience now, because that's part of the unmasking for me.
Yeah. Okay. So I've got a couple more questions I want to get to, and then we'll do a quick Q&A session. So if anyone's got questions they want to drop into the chat box, we'll get to those right after during the Q&A. So my next question was just, are there any tips or tricks you can give to ADHD writers? Because, it's hard for us to finish projects, let alone a whole book. And you've finished your book and have published and are working on a second one. Do you have any tips or tricks for writers with ADHD that are trying to finish their projects?
I was a bit naughty with my book. Because I'd started a new job, and when you start a new job, you don't have heaps of stuff to do. I actually wrote a lot of my book while I was at work. So I was getting the dopamine hit of writing when I'm not supposed to be. I don't know if that's a tip I would put in a book of how to help ADHD writers. I had this like golden window in the morning of an hour where my medication, I actually wrote quite a decent amount of it before I was medicated. And that was easy because it was like a diary of just getting everything out. And then afterwards, when I was medicated, I had this hour where I knew that was like my prime hour of writing. And so I would just go hard in that hour. I'm really competitive. So I had figured out how many words I could write in an hour, and I would try and beat that. Or I would like say to myself, you're not going to stop until you've written that many words. And because I'm competitive, even with myself, I would stick to that. A deadline, like I've said that before, a deadline helped me. So the book was almost finished. I had an editor and she wanted the final draft by this particular date. Of course, the day before that, I decided that I had to completely change so many parts of it. So I feel like, or maybe it's 2 days before, I spent 2 days going through and just like giving it a real overhaul and like really like making it better. But I did that that was all I did for 2 days. I just did not speak to anybody. I didn't do anything else because I knew I had to have it by this date. And also I think writing about what you like is I assume people write about what they like, but yeah, I'm probably not the best person to give tips because I've been trying to write my second book for so long now and it's just not flowing like my other one because autism's so much more complex to me than it feels like ADHD is, and I'm struggling to write that. So I don't know if I'm the best person to give tips. That's what I did.
Yeah. It's hard because I still have my novels that I'm like, I don't know when I'll get around to finishing them because it's so hard. The one book I published last year, that was only due to putting up a pre-order date on Amazon. So I was like, okay, I know I have to by this date. So that was like the only motivating thing to help me get through it.
Yeah, and whatever, and that's right. Like whatever works for you. I guess it's figuring out how your brain works and what motivates you. You know, like I know I'm competitive, so I appeal to my competitive side. So yeah, it's just those little things of understanding what works for you, and what works for you might not work for somebody else, and that's okay. You know, so yeah, learning about how your brain gets pushed into doing things.
Yeah, I tend to I avoid. I like to avoid consequences and disappointing others.
Yeah.
And I like rewards. And so with Amazon with the pre-orders, it was kind of both. I get both because the reward is book sales from the pre-order.
Yeah.
The consequence is if I push back my date with Amazon, they won't allow you to do pre-orders again for a long time.
Oh,
And so
that's a good motivation.
So it's like, I don't want to lose the privilege. So
yeah, no, that's fair enough.
Let's see. My next one was, what are some stereotypes about ADHD or autism or being neurodivergent that you think writers who are neurotypical should be careful of?
The main thing is you've met one neurodivergent person, meaning you've met one neurodivergent person. So we are all so different, and we have so many other experiences like, you know, trauma or PTSD or depression. You know, there's so many other co-occurring conditions that you can't stereotype people because, you know, you've met one person with ADHD or you've read about ADHD or you've seen a movie about an autistic person. You know, there are a lot of stereotypes out there that are portrayed in writing and, you know, movies and stuff like that. I think it's really, really hard for people to write about neurodivergence if they're not neurodivergent themselves. And if they are going to do that, they need to ask a variety of people to be sensitivity readers for them. There's so many stereotypes. You know, there's also some people with like intellectual disability, but there's some people who are gifted. You know, so I think if you're going to do it, you really need to have an understanding of the nuances of neurodivergence, because it's a tricky one to try and take on if you don't have lived experience yourself.
Mm-hmm. It's funny how you just mentioned gifted, and I was thinking about what my therapist had said, because my therapist was the one who first recognized and pointed out my ADHD, and she was explaining to me how, like, you know, people with ADHD, especially women, sometimes they're so smart, they have a high IQ, which is why they don't get diagnosed and it gets missed, because their intelligence kind of can cover up and mask their ADHD symptoms. And when she said that, I was like, so you're saying I'm a genius?
Well, have you heard of the term twice exceptional?
No.
So that's pretty much exactly what you're talking about. So someone who is, so I'm the same to you as you. I was a grade A student. I would occasionally get a B, maybe a B plus. I did not even try. It just felt easy to me. I loved school. But I was living with a disability like yourself. And so if you are of high intelligence and you also have a disability, it's called twice exceptional, which means basically you've had to overcome all these obstacles and you've got a really high intelligence, but you're actually, if you actually went and had your IQ tested, it would actually be a lot higher than you would even suspect. But because you've struggled with a disability, it hasn't had the chance to fully come to the surface. So even though you may have done really, really well in school, or you've gone on to achieve lots of things, it's the idea that, you know, with those struggles, you could have, without those struggles, you know, you could have scored even higher or achieved even higher because you've had things to struggle up against. So it's very interesting. I've done a terrible job of explaining that. Look into it because it's very interesting to read. So yes, you are twice exceptional. I'm just going to tell you that now. You are twice exceptional.
Well, that is really cool. I've never heard of that, but now it's something else to go into my ADHD rabbit hole.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my last question before we get to the Q&A is, are there any books or resources that you know of that can help writers who are trying to portray neurodivergent characters?
I mean, obviously my book, like definitely. The best resource for learning about neurodivergent people and how to portray them is people who are neurodivergent. The best possible resource for me for that is TikTok. People with lived experience sharing their experiences. It's just endlessly fascinating to me to hear other people's experiences and self-discovery. So one of the things, an autistic trait that I have is an endless interest in myself and my place in the world and other people and how they behave towards me and how I behave towards them, and talking about, you know, where I belong and where they belong and what this meant and that. Like, so autistic people never get sick of talking about that stuff. So TikTok is like catnip for me for that kind of thing. And it's been so helpful to me to to help me define my own neurodivergence, and also to hear about other people's, and to just develop this sense of, you know, acceptance and love and care for other people and what their experiences are. And I think if you're going to write about it, you need to immerse yourself in it because it is a complex world. You can't just take a list of criteria and just know what you're talking about. You need to get amongst these brilliant people and learn about us from us.
Yeah.
So no, I don't have any books per se. There is one book. I don't know whether it would help people writing for neurodivergent characters. I actually, now I've just realized I've just totally forgotten the name of it. Sari Solden is the writer, Sari Solden. I think it's called Women with ADHD or something like that. That's a really, really good book. It was very positively portrayed, and I really appreciated that because, you know, you hear so many negative things that it was nice to read something so positive.
Yeah. I love TikTok. I will say that I've been addicted ever since I got on there.
Yeah.
And you learn so much, which I didn't expect when I first joined it. I was like, wow, I learned more from TikTok than I think I did in school.
The thing I like about TikTok is it was obviously designed to be, you know, a social media thing, and, you know, people can put funny videos, but these groups of minorities have really, we've taken over, and people that didn't necessarily have a voice before have a voice. And it's like this little underground rebellion of people who are like, well, no, I do have something to say, and people who are like, well, I want to hear it, so tell me. You know, it's this constant sharing, and it's actually life-changing. It really is. I've actually put in, I've applied to speak at People with Disability of Western Australia's conference at the end of the year. And the subject that I've put in and hopefully will get accepted for is, I titled it The Neurodivergence Emergence, Why Social Media Matters. And I'm talking about that very thing, people who have been isolated or who have been misunderstood or, misdiagnosed, have this resource at their fingertips now that they didn't have before. And it's really important that we have that.
Yeah. Awesome. I see a question here. Says, have you ever woken up from a dead sleep in complete panic? I've been dealing with that a lot lately, just out of nowhere.
Yeah, I have a lot. I think I mentioned before, I used to have dreams about organizing things and I'd be late for things and I'd be trying to call people and the phone wouldn't work. And yeah, I would wake up like that, just literally like that. It is a horrible feeling. And I feel like it's a subconscious, you're struggling in your daily life and it's a subconscious representation of you literally just surviving sometimes. Like it's just all you can do to just get through the day. And yeah, it's like a reaction your body and your brain is having. So yes, I have done that, and I have done that quite a lot. I don't do it anywhere near as much since being diagnosed, medicated, and understanding my brain though, which has been a relief. But I do wake up very early because I'm excited about things. Thanks ADHD. If I wake up at like anywhere from 4, I'm like, oh well, might as well get up and do like the thousands of things that I want to do.
Are you more of a morning person or night owl?
I'm both, honestly. I'm so excited by life that I can't do both. Like as much as I would like to be able to do both, I'm probably more a morning person than a night person, but like equally, when you get to night and like you've spent all day doing the things that you need to do, but nighttime you're like, oh, everyone else is quiet and I've got time to myself, and you just want to go on your phone, and before you know it, it's like 10:30, 11. Like I can't stay up any later than that because I'll be a wreck, but the temptation is definitely there. Yeah, I'm probably mostly a morning person, I would say. What about you?
I am a night owl for sure. I will stay up super late, have no problem. I don't know. I made a post about this on my Facebook page last week, and I was just like, why is it that like all day I will not want to do anything, but then midnight hits and I'm like, let's do everything that we didn't do.
Do you sleep in the next day? Like, can you sleep in later?
Yeah, I work for myself from home, so luckily I can make my own schedule and stuff. So I usually don't get up till like around 9, 10.
Yeah. So that's good. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. If that's what works for you, and that's the time where your brain is at its optimum and its most creative. This is what I talk about when I talk about pushing back against a neurotypical ideal. Like, we're told that that's a bad thing, right? Like, there's probably an element of you going, oh, I really shouldn't be doing this. But why? If that works for you and you can manage and you are still getting enough sleep that it's not affecting you in the day, well, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. I would say usually I'll go to sleep around 2 a.m. 2 to 3, and then get up around 9 or 10. But I've been playing around with the idea of just staying up till like 4 or 5, going to bed at like 5, 6, and then sleep until like 1 or 2.
See, if you can do that, that's like, why not? I know I can't. Like, if I go to bed at 1 o'clock, I will still wake up at 5 o'clock. Like my body just won't let me do that. But if I could, I would. Like, I think that's great. Do it.
Yeah. Let's see. I bribed myself with video games. Yes, I'm nearly 40 and super into video games.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that. Okay. I have a game that I play every single night before I go to bed on my phone, and that is like my treat to myself. So there's nothing wrong. There's no age limit on whatever it is that you want to do.
Yeah.
I just bought myself a pink keyboard. So, there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, see, you know what? I think, is it like an energy thing? Like other people's energies are not around you. Like the world is quiet. You can't contact other people. So you've just got that freedom to just do what you need to do.
Well, I was looking into, and there's a book that I want to get. I think it's called Being a Hunter in a Farmer's World or something. I can't remember the exact title, but it basically talks about, back before the industrial, like back in time when, we had tribes and had to survive against wildlife and things. People lived in groups where, some people had to be up all night to watch out for the group and make sure there's no threat or danger coming. And so that's why some have developed into, that night owl being awake all night, and some were, morning people, early morning, because they had to kind of have those shifts where someone had to always be up and always on the lookout. So that was interesting to find out. And I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm definitely that night person that is up all night.
I think whatever works for you, that idea that we have to do things in a certain way it's done. Let's move on. Yeah, see, the lack of the notifications, exactly. The lack of distraction. So if that works for you, awesome. Do it.
Yeah. I turn off notifications on my phone because I'm like, anytime I see that little red thing, I don't need to check it, but I always do.
I also hate the red dot on my screen. Get the red dot off the screen.
Yeah.
See, she was a night nurse. That makes sense. So she was keeping an eye on everything at nighttime. That makes sense.
Yeah, and I always wanted a job where I was like, I could work at night, because I'm like, I'm a night person, and we are too catered to the morning people. Like, we need to change things.
I think also my morningness was probably out of necessity, because my first son, for about the first 2 years of his life, woke at 4:45 a.m. He's now 13 and I have to wake him up. But yeah, my body got into this rhythm and routine of being up super early, because I just gave into it. I couldn't fight it. He wasn't going back to sleep. So yeah, it's almost like I got into that way of being, and I'm stuck there now.
Yeah. Which is why I've always said, I'm like, I cannot go back to a regular job, because my job before, I would be up like 5 a.m. and have to leave around 6:30. I'm just like, I can't go back to mornings.
Yeah. No, if it doesn't suit you, it doesn't suit you. Well, my new job that I'm starting next week is completely working from home, so I am thrilled about that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Full moons are the tough.
They are. The kids always go crazy when it's a full moon.
So, yeah, thank you, Alana, for being here. I don't see any more questions or comments in the chat. So I guess we'll start to wrap things up. But thank you so much for being here and doing this interview with me. I have all of the links to Alana's book if you guys want to get it, or her socials are in the description below. Any last words you want to say?
No, just thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed chatting with you, and I'm sure we could talk for another 2 hours.
Yeah.
That was really lovely to be here. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And I hope, thank you for everyone who joined us here live. And if you are catching the replay, thank you for being here. I hope this was helpful and informative. And if you want to see more of these Writing Diversely videos, I have a playlist listed in the description below. And if you're a writer trying to write diverse characters, I also have an online course that could help you with that as well. So all the links are down below. And Neurodivergent says, thank you, ladies. This has been such a validating interview. So
thank you for being here.
So I will see you guys soon. Thank you for being here. I will see you with another video next month.
Thanks, Vanessa.